In October 2024, off the coast of San Diego, the deck of JS Kaga shimmered under overcast skies. A US F-35B Lightning II descended toward the vessel, its engine wash rippling across heat-resistant plating. The ship, officially classified as a helicopter destroyer, was performing what visual records confirm as fixed-wing aircraft operations. Nearby technicians watched from the bridge as the jet touched down on the flat main deck. For analysts tracking regional naval developments, the image carried weight beyond the moment itself. It marked a quiet but profound evolution in Japan's maritime aviation capabilities, a subtle turn in the evolving balance of power across the Western Pacific. What began as structural modification now stood as operational reality. And so, across calm waters, the story unfolds, measured, deliberate, and real. The scene aboard JS Kaga in October 2024 represented the culmination of years of incremental transformation. The vessel's silhouette had changed. Where once a trapezoidal bow defined the forward deck, now a near rectangular profile extended toward the horizon. The flight deck surface bore new coatings designed to withstand the extreme heat generated by vertical thrust operations. Lighting arrays lined the deck edges, installed for night operations that had never been part of the original design parameters. Between October 5th and November 18th, 2024, the Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force announced that JS Kaga would undertake developmental tests to assess her ability to operate F-35B aircraft in concert with the US Navy. The announcement followed months of structural work completed at shipyards in Kure, where engineers had reinforced deck plating and reconfigured internal spaces to support fixed-wing aviation logistics. On October 20th, 2024, footage released to media outlets confirmed what had been anticipated for years. A specially instrumented F-35B landed aboard Kaga off the Southern California coast. The aircraft, piloted by test crews from Air Test and Evaluation Squadron VX-23, executed short takeoff and vertical landing profiles while shipboard teams monitored deck stress, thermal dispersion, and operational flow. The tests were methodical, repeating patterns until datasets reached statistical significance. For observers tracking Japan's post-war naval evolution, the moment carried symbolic resonance. The vessel's official classification remained helicopter destroyer, a designation rooted in constitutional constraints and political sensitivity, yet the capability set increasingly mirrored that of a light aircraft carrier. The distinction between terminology and function had narrowed to the point of irrelevance in operational terms. The developmental trials aboard Kaga were not isolated events. They formed part of a broader conversion program affecting the entire Izumo-class platform. JS Izumo, Kaga's sister ship, had already undergone initial modifications and was scheduled for full conversion by fiscal year 2027. Together, the two vessels represented Japan's largest surface combatants and its most significant investment in power projection capability since the Second World War. In September 2025, media coverage noted that the Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force had formally changed the hull classification symbol for these vessels, from DDH, helicopter destroyer, to CVM, aircraft carrying multi-role cruiser. The redesignation took effect in October 2024, aligning nomenclature with capability. It was a quiet acknowledgement that form had followed function, and that language could no longer obscure the strategic reality taking shape across the Western Pacific. What made the Kaga trial significant was not novelty, but confirmation. The question had never been whether Japan could operate fixed-wing aircraft from these platforms. Engineering studies had validated feasibility years earlier. The question was whether Japan would commit to the operational, budgetary, and strategic implications of doing so. The October 2024 tests provided the answer. They demonstrated not just technical capability, but institutional resolve. Analysts from RAND and other defense institutes described the outcome as a quiet revolution in regional air power projection. The transformation had unfolded without fanfare, progressing through bureaucratic channels and interagency coordination rather than dramatic announcement. It reflected a pattern common to Japanese defense policy: incremental adjustment calibrated to minimize domestic controversy while expanding operational flexibility. The footage from San Diego showed more than aircraft operations. It showed the convergence of alliance integration, industrial execution, and strategic signaling. Each element had evolved in parallel, synchronized through years of planning and coordination. And as the F-35B lifted off from Kaga's deck, trailing heat and noise across calm waters, the transformation became visible. No longer conceptual, but real. The modifications to JS Kaga did not begin in 2024. Reports indicate that the ship's bow redesign and deck reinforcement commenced in March 2022, when Kaga entered Japan Marine United's shipyard in Kure. The conversion program had been authorized years earlier, following policy reviews that that assess Japan's maritime defense requirements against evolving regional threats. The Japan Ministry of Defense and the Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force coordinated the conversion program through a structure that distributed responsibilities across multiple agencies. The Acquisition Technology and Logistics Agency oversaw technical specifications and procurement timelines. Japan Marine United and other shipyard contractors executed the physical modifications. The Japan Air Self-Defense Force contributed operational requirements, as land-based F-35B units were planned to operate from these ships in future deployments. The structural changes were extensive. Engineers removed sections of the original deck plating and replaced them with materials capable of withstanding temperatures exceeding 200 degrees Celsius. The thermal output of an F-35B operating in vertical landing mode. The bow was reshaped to increase usable deck length and improve airflow patterns during short takeoff operations. Internal spaces were reconfigured to accommodate aviation fuel storage, maintenance facilities, and munitions handling systems specific to fixed-wing aircraft. Lighting systems were installed to support night operations, a capability the vessels had never required when limited to helicopter operations. The addition of visual landing aids, deck markings, and communications infrastructure reflected the shift from rotary wing support to fixed-wing aviation. Each modification was documented through progress reports submitted to oversight committees within the Ministry of Defense. The U.S. Navy and Marine Corps contributed the F-35B test aircraft, test pilots, and support teams from the Integrated Test Force at Naval Air Station Patuxent River. The developmental trial aboard Kaga featured U.S. assets operating in conjunction with Japanese shipboard crews, a model of alliance integration that extended beyond equipment sharing to operational doctrine and training protocols. Defense industry contractors such as Lockheed Martin provided the aircraft and technical expertise. Shipyard engineers delivered the deck modifications according to specifications developed through collaborative design reviews. Open source tracking and imagery analysts observed the shift in deck shape and classification, confirming the stated intent through satellite imagery and port observations. The conversion comprised interagency cooperation, international alliance integration, industrial execution, and strategic signaling. Each layer reinforced the others, creating a capability structure that was greater than the sum of its parts. The institutional coordination required to execute such a transformation reflected decades of alliance maturity and defense industrial capacity. For regional planners, the developments reflected how Japan was extending its maritime air power reach within the constraints of its post-war legal framework. Article 9 of the Japanese Constitution prohibits the maintenance of war potential, a clause that has shaped defense policy for nearly 8 decades, yet successive governments have interpreted the provision to permit defensive capabilities, including those that enhance deterrence and alliance contributions. The conversion from DDH to CVM shifted the narrative from anti-submarine escort to fixed-wing deployment. The distinction was more than semantic. It represented a redefinition of mission scope, operational range, and strategic posture. While the vessels were not labeled aircraft carriers, a term laden with historical and political sensitivity in Japan, the capability set increasingly mirrored a light carrier role. The US-Japan alliance benefited from enhanced interoperability, joint deck operations, shared logistics, and training with US short takeoff vertical landing capable aviation strengthened collective deterrent posture. The visuals of F-35B operations aboard a Japanese vessel sent a signal beyond the immediate region. They demonstrated capability, resolve, and the depth of alliance integration in the wider context of Sino-Japanese maritime tensions. Especially around the East China Sea and the Senkaku Islands, Japan's move added a layer of air-sea readiness and projection. While not overtly aggressive, the upgraded fleet structure aligned with a defensive posture narrative that incorporated forward mobility. The ability to deploy fixed-wing fighters from mobile platforms extended Japan's defensive perimeter and complicated adversary planning assumptions. Through these steady transitions, a new kind of presence took shape, defined not by rhetoric but by readiness. The successful completion of F-35B trials aboard JS Kaga in late 2024 marked a transition point. What had been a conversion program became an operational capability. The implications extended across multiple dimensions: tactical, strategic, and alliance-based. At the tactical level, the addition of fixed-wing fighter aircraft to Japan's naval order of battle enhanced air defense and strike capabilities. The F-35B's sensor suite, stealth characteristics, and weapons integration provided a qualitative upgrade over helicopter-based aviation. The aircraft could engage targets at extended ranges, conduct suppression of enemy air defenses, and provide airborne battle management for distributed maritime operations. The platform's short takeoff and vertical landing capabilities made it compatible with the Izumi Izumo-class deck dimensions. Unlike conventional carrier aircraft, which require catapults and a resting gear, the F-35B could operate from relatively compact flight decks. This compatibility enabled Japan to field carrier-capable aviation without constructing purpose-built fleet carriers, a distinction that preserved political sensitivity while expanding operational flexibility. Strategically, the Izumo-class conversion altered regional power dynamics. China's People's Liberation Army Navy had been expanding its carrier fleet with multiple platforms entering service throughout the 2010s and 2020s. Japan's acquisition of carrier-capable aviation provided a counterweight within the alliance framework, distributing air power projection across multiple partners rather than relying solely on U.S. carrier strike groups. The geographic positioning of Japan's home islands provided strategic advantages. With bases spanning from Okinawa to Hokkaido, the Maritime Self-Defense Force could deploy carrier-capable vessels across critical sea lanes and maritime choke points. The ability to sustain fixed-wing aviation from mobile platforms extended Japan's reach without requiring permanent overseas basing, a constraint that had historically limited power projection. Alliance integration deepened through shared training, logistics, and operational planning. US and Japanese forces conducted joint exercises that incorporated F-35B operations from both American and Japanese platforms. The interoperability extended to maintenance protocols, communication systems, and tactical doctrine. The convergence created redundancy and flexibility, enhancing collective deterrence through operational unpredictability. Regional states observed the developments with varying perspectives. South Korea, which operates its own light carriers and F-35B aircraft, viewed Japan's capabilities through the lens of bilateral competition and shared alliance commitments. Australia, another F-35B operator, saw opportunities for trilateral cooperation in maritime security operations. China characterized the developments as militarization and a departure from Japan's post-war pacifism, though the rhetorical response did not alter the operational reality. For analysts tracking maritime balance in the Indo-Pacific, the Izumo-class conversion represented one data point among many. China's naval expansion, U.S. force posture adjustments, and regional states' modernization programs collectively shaped the strategic environment. No single development determined outcomes, but each contributed to the evolving calculus of deterrence, presence, and influence. The conversion also reflected budgetary priorities. Japan's defense spending had remained below 1% of GDP for decades, constrained by political consensus and fiscal pressures. Recent years had seen gradual increases, driven by threat perceptions and alliance expectations. The investment in carrier-capable aviation signaled a willingness to allocate resources toward high-end capabilities rather than incremental force structure expansion. The operational deployment patterns would emerge over subsequent years. Initial operations would likely focus on training, alliance exercises, and presence missions. Over time, routine deployments could extend to contested waters, humanitarian operations, and contingency response. The flexibility inherent in mobile aviation platforms enabled a range of mission profiles, from high-intensity conflict to disaster relief. Yet challenges remained. Japan's F-35B fleet was limited in size, with procurement planned across multiple fiscal years. Pilot training, maintenance infrastructure, and operational doctrine required continuous development. The vessels themselves remained constrained by deck size, limiting the number of aircraft that could be embarked simultaneously. These factors imposed practical limits on operational scope, even as strategic signaling amplified the perceived capability. Through careful calibration, Japan navigated the tension between capability expansion and political constraint. The result was a force structure that enhanced deterrence while maintaining continuity with post-war defense policy. The balance was delicate, sustained through incremental steps rather than dramatic transformation. The integration of F-35B operations aboard Japanese vessels extended beyond bilateral cooperation to encompass broader alliance architecture. The aircraft itself represented a multinational program, with partner nations operating variants across air forces, navies, and Marine Corps. The common platform enabled interoperability at scale, creating a distributed network of compatible capabilities across allied forces. Training programs reflected this integration. Japanese pilots trained alongside U.S. Marine Corps aviators at bases in Arizona and other locations. Maintenance personnel attended common schools, learning standardized procedures that enabled cross-servicing and logistics sharing. The operational concepts developed through joint exercises informed doctrine across both forces, creating shared understanding of tactics, tactics, employment, and command structures. The strategic benefits extended to crisis response and contingency planning. In scenarios requiring rapid deployment of air power, carrier-capable aviation provided options that were not available through land-based forces alone. The mobility of naval platforms enabled repositioning in response to emerging threats, while the inherent flexibility of aviation assets allowed mission adaptation across a spectrum of operations. Yet the alliance architecture also imposed constraints. Interoperability required adherence to common standards, limiting customization and national adaptation. Logistics chains became interdependent, creating vulnerabilities if supply networks were disrupted. The shared nature of platforms and systems meant that technology security and operational security extended across national boundaries, requiring continuous coordination and trust. Looking forward, the trajectory of Japan's carrier aviation program remained tied to broader defense priorities. Fiscal constraints, demographic challenges, and competing modernization requirements would shape force structure decisions in coming years. The Izumo-class vessels represented a capability investment, but sustaining that capability required ongoing resource allocation across procurement, training, and operations. The conversion of JS Izumo, scheduled for completion by fiscal year 2027, would bring both vessels into operational status within a similar time frame. This would provide the Maritime Self-Defense Force with 2 carrier-capable platforms, enabling continuous presence through rotation and maintenance cycles. The operational tempo would depend on crew availability, aircraft procurement, and mission requirements. Regional dynamics would also influence deployment patterns. Tensions in the East China Sea, developments on the Korean Peninsula, and broader Indo-Pacific security trends would shape where and how these vessels operated. The platforms provided capability, but employment decisions reflected strategic assessment and political will. The institutional memory of the Second World War remained a factor in Japanese defense policy. The historical legacy of aircraft carriers and imperial naval expansion shaped public discourse and political sensitivity. The careful distinction between helicopter destroyers and aircraft carriers reflected this historical consciousness, even as operational capabilities converged. The balance between memory and modernization defined the parameters within which policy evolved. International legal frameworks also shaped operational scope. The United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, Freedom of Navigation Principles, and regional security agreements provided the legal architecture within which naval operations occurred. Japan's carrier aviation program operated within these frameworks, conducting operations consistent with international law and alliance commitments. As the Izumo-class vessels transitioned to operational status, attention would shift toward integration with broader fleet operations. Anti-submarine warfare, ballistic missile defense, and amphibious operations would all interface with carrier aviation capabilities. The multi-mission flexibility of modern naval platforms enabled combined operations, but coordination and command structures required continuous refinement. The technological evolution of the F-35B itself would influence long-term utility. Software upgrades, weapons integration, and capability enhancements occurred through block upgrades coordinated across the international user base. Japan's participation in this process ensured access to evolving capabilities while contributing to collective development costs. Through these multiple dimensions, alliance, capability, strategy, and institution, Japan's carrier aviation program continued to unfold. The October 2024 trials aboard JS Kaga represented one milestone among many. The trajectory extended beyond any single event, shaped by decisions yet to be made and circumstances yet to emerge. In the steady rhythm of naval modernization, nations revealed their pursuit of balance between constraint and capability. What began aboard JS Kaga in October 2024 as developmental testing now stands as operational reality, documented, verified, and integrated into the broader structure of maritime defense. The transformation of the Izumo-class vessels reflects patterns common to alliance evolution: incremental adjustment, institutional coordination, and capability development calibrated to strategic environment. The vessels themselves are symbols of continuity and change, carrying forward the maritime traditions of Japan's self-defense forces while expanding the operational toolkit available to planners and commanders. The footage of F-35B operations, the aircraft descending through salt air, the deck crew moving with practiced precision, the ship steady beneath overcast skies, captured a moment of transition, not dramatic rupture, but Measured adaptation, the kind of change that unfolds through years of planning, coordination, and execution rather than sudden announcement. For analysts tracking regional security dynamics, the Izumo-class conversion represents one data point within a complex field. China's naval expansion, U.S. force posture adjustments, regional modernization programs, and alliance deepening collectively shape the strategic landscape. Each development influences the others, creating feedback loops that resist simple causation or linear prediction. What remains clear is that capability generates options. The ability to deploy fixed-wing aviation from mobile platforms extends reach, enhances deterrence, and provides flexibility across mission sets. Whether those capabilities are employed and under what circumstances depends on strategic decisions shaped by political will, threat assessment, and alliance consultation. The documentary record, satellite imagery, official announcements, test footage, and open source reporting traces a clear progression from concept to reality. The institutional frameworks, industrial capacity, and alliance structures that enabled this transformation did not emerge overnight. They represent decades of investment, cooperation, and strategic planning. As JS Kaga and JS Izumo move toward full operational status, they join a fleet that has evolved continuously since its establishment in the 1950s. The Maritime Self-Defense Force has expanded from coastal defense to blue water operations, from anti-submarine warfare to ballistic missile defense, from helicopter aviation to fixed-wing carrier operations. Each step built upon the previous, creating cumulative capability through sustained effort. The story of Japan's carrier aviation program is not one of sudden transformation, but of patient adaptation. It unfolds in shipyards and training facilities, in policy documents and budget allocations, in alliance exercises and operational deployments. The rhythm is deliberate, the pace measured, the direction clear, and somewhere beyond the horizon, as new challenges emerge and strategic conditions shift, the next adaptation has already begun. In the quiet work of defense planners, engineers, and sailors, the future takes shape, not through proclamation, but through preparation, not through rhetoric, but through readiness. The deck of JS Kaga, once designed for helicopters alone, now accommodates a fighter jet whose very presence alters regional calculations. The transformation stands complete, yet the story continues. For in the domain of maritime strategy, each capability achieved opens new questions, new possibilities, new requirements. In the steady rhythm of preparation, nations reveal their understanding of power, not as spectacle, but as presence, not as declaration, but as demonstration. And in that quiet reality, the balance shifts, adapts, and holds.